Hello and welcome to the first trust-wide CPD session of this academic year. This year's sessions are on the theme of adaptive teaching, and today we're looking at how we adapt teaching through explicit instruction. Each of the sessions this year will link to the EEF's 5-a-day principles. These are the aspects of high-quality teaching. The educational and local landscape has changed over the past few years for a myriad of reasons, with numbers of pupils on the SEND registers rising and the gap widening between disadvantaged pupils and their peers. Along with this, we have the shift from differentiation to adaptation. So you may argue that now it is more important than ever to ensure we have high-quality teaching in all classrooms. This is not just for SEND pupils. Good teaching for SEND pupils is good teaching for all, and I want to emphasise that in this training we'll be exploring how we adapt to the needs of all pupils and not just those with SEND needs. What is adaptive teaching? When we use this phrase, we are talking about responding to students' needs in real time, adjusting instruction based on ongoing assessment and observation, and using different strategies, supports, or levels of challenge. It is not just for SEND pupils, and it is not just giving more challenging tasks to higher attainers. There is also a misconception that because teachers are choosing which strategies to use in the moment, that adaptive teaching is unplanned, but this isn't the case. What is explicit instruction? Here we are referring to a structured, teacher-led approach that involves step-by-step teaching, modelling and guided practice, frequent checks for understanding, and scaffolding and feedback. It is not just giving pupils instructions, and it is not just chalk and talk. So how do these two things work together? Explicit instruction provides the foundation. These strategies ensure that all students receive clear, direct teaching of key concepts. Adaptive teaching personalises the delivery. Teachers use formative assessment to adapt how they deliver explicit instruction, for example, by reactivating prior knowledge, questioning, and scaffolding. Together, these two things support equity. All students benefit from the clarity of explicit instruction and the responsiveness of adaptive teaching. For your first task, you will be watching a 5-minute video clip and making notes to answer the question, what strategies does the teacher use to provide clear instruction that adapts to the needs of all learners? Once you've done this, talk about your ideas with those sitting near you. Pause here for your facilitator to load the video clip. Thank you for completing that task. We will be revisiting this later in the session. Now, when it comes to explicit instruction, Rosenshine's work is the most prominent. Rosenshine, an educational psychologist, identified a series of principles based on extensive research in cognitive science, classroom practices of effective teachers, and cognitive supports for learning. His work culminated in the publication of Principles of Instruction, which outlines 10 key principles that can be applied across various educational contexts. I know that most of you will have seen this research before, but it's okay if you haven't. For this session, we will focus on 4 of the areas with the aim of giving you some practical strategies to take away from the training and trial in your classrooms. Those 4 strategies will be linked to daily review, asking questions, checking student understanding, and scaffolds for difficult tasks. The first aspect we're going to look at is daily review. This is an area that is generally strong across all of our schools because of the do now tasks at the start of lessons. Daily review is an important component of instruction as it helps to strengthen the connections of the material learned. We know that learning is a change to the long-term memory, and our do now tasks give us a built-in mechanism to reactivate prior learning to ensure information is remembered in the long term and can be built upon. So here are some practical examples of do now tasks to give you some ideas of how to reactivate the prior knowledge of all students. Students can be asked to sketch, label, give an example, identify the difference, complete a quick quiz, give a key quote, define, solve, or list. Now, I tried to come up with an acronym to help you remember all of these, but I did fail, so there is just a list there at the top of the screen. In terms of adapting these tasks, giving students a set number of times that they can look back in their books on their previous learning is a quick win. This requires no preparation from the teacher and guides pupils to review what they've learned. Remember, the purpose is to reactivate the learning, not to test pupils. You're going to have a moment to discuss on your tables which of those 9 forms of do now tasks would work best for your year group or subjects. Which do you do already? How would you adapt it for pupils who are stuck? Do you like the idea of having a set number of times to look back in their books, or do you have other ideas? Take 5 minutes to discuss this as a group or pair. Pause here. We're going to move on now to look at Principle 3, which is asking questions. The most successful teachers spend more than half the class time lecturing, demonstrating, and asking questions. If we think back to that video clip that we watched at the start, the teacher is constantly asking questions, and he is intentional in his questioning. He is intentional in terms of what key knowledge he wants his students to retain, and he is also deliberate in who he chooses to answer the questions. So Rosenshine's research revealed that more effective teachers, so those teachers whose classrooms made the highest gains in achievement tests, employed the following questioning strategies. He found that more effective teachers asked more questions, probed in more depth, spent more time explaining, clarifying, and checking for understanding, asked students to think aloud, and involved more students. And this is where cold calling can be really impactful. It allows you to be intentional with who you choose to answer your question, ensures that no one dominates or gets overlooked, and by knowing that anyone can be called upon, it keeps the whole class actively thinking. Rosenshine suggested 6 question stems that you can use to get your students to think more deeply about their learning, as well as gauging their level of understanding. If you'd like to learn more about why these questions were chosen and how they can be used, there is an article linked which is a 4-minute read, and it can give you an overview. Now, each of these questions involve deep thinking, and so to adapt for the needs of all learners, the scaffolding triangle can be applied. Now, this scaffolding triangle was originally developed to help teaching assistants in supporting pupils, but it can also be used by teachers when questioning also. The main idea is that we want to foster greater pupil independence, and the most independent means of scaffolding would be self-scaffolding, so referring to a working wall or choosing the appropriate resource to help yourself or looking back at previous work. When a pupil struggles to answer a question themselves, it can be tempting to jump to correcting them straight away. But to foster that independence, prompting would be the next step, then cluing, then modelling. I'll talk through an example. So I took the sentence stem, what is the main idea of, and completed it with why teachers should ask more questions. So say I asked you what is the main idea behind why teachers should ask more questions. An example of self-scaffolding would be you reading over your notes or looking back at these slides. If you weren't able to do that, I would offer a prompt. What can you tell me about teacher questioning? Then a clue. It was linked to student outcomes. Modelling's tricky to apply here, but correcting is always the final resort. For your next task, I'm going to ask you to complete one question stem using a topic that you might discuss with your own class and consider the adaptations you could make in line with that scaffolding triangle. I've left my model on the screen. You have 5 minutes and you can do this in pairs or groups. Pause here. I hope you found that task useful in considering how you can use prompting, cluing and modelling to adapt your questioning to your learners. Thinking back to what I said at the start, adapted teaching is not unplanned. Now, it's unrealistic to say that every question you ask in a lesson should be planned for, but for those key questions that target essential learning, giving consideration to what will be asked and how we can adapt this for pupils is crucial. Next, we're going to look at checking student understanding. Less successful teachers ask, are there any questions? And no questions are taken to mean there are no problems, but this is not the case. More successful teachers check on all students. For your next task, read the article independently and highlight what stands out to you. Your in-school facilitator will give you a copy of this article. You have 5 minutes. Pause here. The main idea of that article is that whole class questioning is the most efficient and valid means of gauging the understanding of your class. With colleagues near you, discuss the 3 questions on the screen. You have 5 minutes. Pause here. Finally, we're going to look at scaffolding. A scaffold is a temporary support to assist learning. It can include modelling, teacher thinking aloud, cue cards, and checklists, among others. Scaffolds can be split into 3 main categories: visual, verbal, or written. Visual scaffolds may support a pupil to know what equipment they need, the steps they need to take, or what their work should look like. Verbal strategies provide a scaffold that might involve reteaching a tricky concept or questioning to identify and address misconceptions. Written scaffolds will typically be provided for a pupil to support them with an independent written task. It could be the notes made on the whiteboard during class discussion or a child's previous work. For your task as a pair or group, please mind map the strategies that could be used for your year group or subject. Pick only one category, visual, verbal or written, but try to ensure that all 3 categories are covered amongst your staff so you aren't all covering verbal strategies, for example. If your facilitator has provided large paper, these sheets can be displayed in your PPA space for reference. I'll share a model so you know what's expected, but pause here to split into your groups if needed. To clarify, as a group, you are going to generate a mind map of visual, verbal, or written scaffolds, and these should be suitable for your class or classes. Now, it can be easy to fall into using the same strategies that you've always used, but in thinking about this together, the aim is for you to create a bank of scaffolds that you can always draw from. Now, this is a partially completed model of the verbal scaffolds. I've thought about the scaffolding triangle here. So one example for prompting could be asking what step comes next. I'll also consider sentence stems for cluing. An example of verbal scaffolding could also be guided writing. You have 10 minutes to complete the mind map on your chosen category. Pause here. Here is an example of a generic verbal scaffold mind map. For prompting, there are questions like what do you already know? For cluing, there are clues that start with, oh, it was related to, or it's a multiple of 3. Teacher think alouds are a good example of verbal scaffolds, as is guided writing. For visual scaffolds, you may have included a list of steps to follow, a task planner, model examples of work or a waggle or what a good one looks like, images to support vocabulary learning, concrete manipulatives in maths, or graphics and diagrams, among others. For written scaffolds, you may have included a vocabulary bank, a writing frame, sentence starters, previous work that supports recall, a complete or partial model of a problem, a waggle or a wabble, or knowledge organisers, among others. And of course, many of these examples can fit into multiple categories. For example, a sentence starter could be written or it could be verbal. We are now going to re-watch the video that we saw at the start of this training session. And what I would like you to do this time is complete the table with the examples you see of those 4 areas that we covered today. So anytime you see examples of daily review, asking questions, checking for understanding or scaffolding, note them down. Pause here for your facilitator to load the video. For your next steps, please pick 2 things that you're going to trial in your classrooms over the next 2 weeks. There is a list up on the screen, but if there's something you see that you really want to take forward, then of course you can choose that instead. Thank you very much for your engagement today.